Welcome to the third instructional watercolor painting video in Series 1 featuring butterfly attracting plants. This video will focus on a watercolor painting of Moss Verbena. Moss Verbena is a finely textured ground cover with showy violet flower clusters. I have some growing in my backyard. They're often found growing along roadsides, so they're tough and they're drought tolerant. They're also great for hanging baskets and planters. I selected this plant to show you several watercolor techniques. The first is using a wet in wet method, where instead of mixing two colors on the palette and then painting onto your watercolor paper, you will mix two colors directly on the paper as you are painting. The second technique I would like to show you is the softening of hard edges with a cotton swab after the paint has already dried on the paper. Now, when using the wet in wet technique, you may encounter a common and often frustrating problem in watercolor painting called a bloom or a back run. I would like to briefly show you what that looks like and how you can minimize that effect if you don't desire it in your painting. Lastly, I would like to demonstrate the use of an opaque white watercolor paint called gouache to indicate a bumpy texture on the verbena stems. As always, the sketch, all the reference photos, the paint palette that I used, and thorough written instructions are included in the booklet that supplements this series. These sources should give you all the information you need to successfully practice these skills and create your own watercolor painting of Moss Verbena. We're ready to begin our painting, and what I've done already is take the sketch that was in the book and transfer it to the watercolor paper. And if you haven't done this yet, if you need some review, you might want to take a look at video 1. That goes over all you need to know about how to transfer this sketch onto the watercolor paper. We're going to be using a wet in wet technique to start with. I have selected for the flower color cobalt blue and a mixture with opera pink. And opera pink might be an unusual color to start with because it is known as a fugitive color. And what I mean by a fugitive color is that it's not real light fast. It has a history of fading over time, but I found a particular type that has a quinacridone color pigment in it, and that should help stabilize it. And I'm interested to see, because I did a lot of experimenting with these colors to try to get the right violet color that I was looking for, and the opera pink did the trick. So I'm going to try that with the cobalt blue, which is sort of a mild blue color, but beautiful. And hopefully that will get rid of the fugitive nature of the opera pink. As always, I also did a card that documents all of the colors that I used for this painting for my records, in case I do it again. So we're going to start with a wet in wet technique, and I'm going to work from left to right. And I think I will wet it first. So here's my mixture. This is the cobalt blue and the opera pink. I'm actually going to have several brushes that I'm going to be using. I'm going to start with these two. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to wet the paper with water first, and then I'm going to apply the mixture of the two colors. And then I'm going to take this liner brush and I'm going to use just the cobalt blue while it's still wet and run along the edge and let it seep in. So this is your wet in wet technique, and I'm going to be mixing two colors on the paper instead of on the palette. So I'll illustrate that right now for you. Let me set these over here for a minute. Let's wet it first with water. just to get that starchiness out of the paper, get it primed up a little bit. You can go all the way to the edge if you want, or leave a little bit on the upper edge. Now while it's still wet, that's why you have to work a little faster here. You can't let it sit for too long. I'm going to take my liner brush and run some cobalt blue along the edge. And let it kind of seep in that way. And if it needs a little help, you can help it along a little bit. May not have been wet enough. So that's the effect that we're looking for. We'll wet the next petal. You don't have to do this on every petal. Just do it on maybe half of them. And then maybe the other half just do the violet mixture, just to make it interesting. Here's one tip I always do. I always wet my brushes with water before I get started painting. If you don't like that hard edge developing, you can help it along a little bit. I will only demonstrate a few of these, and then we will move on to something else, and I'll finish the rest of these petals off camera. We'll do a few, just so you can get the idea. This one, I am going to still put a little bit of the blue on there. These dotted lines will help you, and also I look at the reference photo to see which ones I'm going to put a little blue on. Now leave these circles in the middle of the flower, leave those. You can go right up to the edge. I'm going to show you how we soften those later with a cotton swab and open them up a little bit, just soften those hard edges. So you can make a hard edge right up to the center of the flower. Put a little blue in that one, right along the upper edge. As they dry, you can see this one's already drying. This is such a pretty effect. This one, I'm just going to do this one a solid violet color. And I didn't wet that first, and that's okay. You can do it either way. I added a little water to my brush to make it go on a little easier. That's another way you can do it. Just be aware, these petals are all connected, so when you come to the middle and you get ready to do the next petal here, just be aware there may be a little line here, because unless you can keep going all the way around, see, now that I've started that, I'm going to go ahead and continue, because if I don't, there'll be a line right there. While it's wet, I'm going to continue with that petal into the next petal. So you really don't have to wet it first, as long as you're working fast and you keep the mixture nice and watery. Most of this one does not have the blue in it, so I'm going to just continue. Make sure I connect that up quickly before it dries right here. Maybe I'll put a little blue on that one, right along the upper edge. Now, fortunately, this one is still a little wet, so when I come around, I will have connected them all without any hard edges here. There's a little bit of one there maybe, but no problem. Such a pretty color. These petals are fused at some points and not fused at other points. It's kind of interesting if you ever get a chance to look at them closely. So this one actually is separated a little bit down here on this end. Okay, that one's done. The thing is, we have to, before we start this one, you see this one, there are no separate petals. They're all fused, so it's one solid area. So I may jump over to another area, because if I start this one here and it bumps up against this one, it's going to create a bloom possibly, or a back run, and I'm going to demonstrate that in just a few minutes, so you will be able to know how to avoid that. This little bud up here is mostly blue, so I'm just going to fill it in with a bluish color while I'm waiting for the rest of these to dry. Just try to vary it a little bit. It makes it so much more fun to look at. This one is one solid, except for right here, one solid fused petal. I'll jump down to this one here. Notice I've got a hard edge here, and I'll do the same for all of these with the circles in the middle of them, in the center of the flower. We will widen those circles in a little bit and soften up those edges. Another thing, before we move on too far, there are some purple highlights in the stems, and so I want to do a first wash on the stems in some areas that will show a little purple, and then later on they will be partially covered with green. So let's go ahead and do that while these others are drying. I can see right here, and that's what these these slash lines are for, kind of to help me remember that this little area is going to be purple. I think this is dry enough now, so I'll be able to go up onto it. Whoops, see that? I can fix that later. A little bit of purple on the stems, and then of course underneath here, these tubular, they're actually tubular flowers, which is why butterflies like those too, because they like to put their proboscis down in the center of that tube and get the nectar out. So this is just an initial wash, and some of it will show through the green when you get ready to put the green on. I'm not going to go all the way to the edge of that because I know that one is still kind of wet. This is a flower bud right here coming out, and that one is somewhat lavender. You just have to be patient and wait until some of these areas dry. Also, we have some areas down in this lower stem, which I would like to do now because it needs to be dry before we put the green on, and they're really tiny. It's a very intricate little painting down in this area, so I'm going to switch to a very small brush. You can see this little bloom sort of forming right there. on that flower because I touched it with the wet paint. That's a good lesson right there. Just need to show some patience and wait for it to dry. I'm going to get a very small brush here and just do a few spots down below. These are new buds that are starting to emerge. You can also do this afterwards. You can glaze over the green again if it didn't show up as much as you would like. I think I will wait for some of these other areas. Let's do one more here. Something happened to that bud. I don't think that one's going to make it. There is another light section below it. I'm going to wait on that. Okay, I think I will continue with the rest of these flowers, and mostly you will see that the blue is on the upper edges, and you can kind of stick with that. Just some of them you can accent and some you can wait and just do violet. That would be fine. Now I'll go ahead and finish these, and when we come back I will show you how we're going to treat these middle areas here. We'll see you in Lesson 3, Part 2.